Bring us, O Father, Mother, God, nearer to thee. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. Well, it occurs to me that some of our choices in our lives, in fact, many of them, are circumscribed by the realities in which we have grown up, in which we live, and if we're lucky enough, in which we grow old. I deeply believe that our basic values, what we hold to be important, whether consciously or unconsciously, that those values shape the everyday, moment-by-moment choices that we make. You know, you've often heard me reference the reflexive choices, which come automatically from our amygdala, that most ancient part of our brain. Choices that are almost pre-programmed into our very cells to help us survive as a species in dangerous conditions that were very present for most of human history. The daily struggle to survive was not just a euphemism, but a stark reality. When our days centered around the creative search for food and drink, and in fact, when we were hyper-vigilant regarding dangers of all sorts that might befall us, we chose very differently, moment by moment, than most of us do today. Although our fears of not having enough, or that at any moment this could all be over, still linger in our psyches, showing up often in very irrational ways. In a parish I once served, literally the wealthiest man in the parish, by all accounts worth millions, came to my office as he was about to retire. And with a straight face and a serious look, he said to me, "I'm really worried about how I'm going to live and how we will eat when I retire." I haven't seen this man for many years, but I hear he's still alive and doing very well in his retirement. A very successful stockbroker in Atlanta, about to be divorced, was convinced that his wife was taking him for all he was worth. And he literally told me that he expected to be in our line of homeless people at the noonday free meal that we offered at our church. And he was absolutely serious. Clearly he was scared, and of course that did not happen. Although collectively we are no longer hunters and gatherers, wherein every small community or family is simply about the task of survival, across the globe there are very real discrepancies between those who have and those who do not, in our country and elsewhere. And these primal fears, the primal fears of those who have very few resources with which to survive, quite literally match their reality. Their lived experience, the circumstances in which they have grown up and are, if they are lucky, growing old, match those unconscious fears. But for those who have been given so much, that's not really true. There's a discrepancy, like a cognitive dissonance, when we cave into our fears instead of facing reality. We are among those who have been given so much. We are very much products of our own experiences, though, are we not? And our choices in our lives seem almost automatic. So to illustrate this, I have blown up in a very large way a New Yorker cartoon. There are no words for you to read, but I want you to take a look. So this is a picture of a woman in a checkout counter in a grocery store. And near the front of the counter, where the checkout person is is her milk and bananas. It looks like some cereal and a box of something else. And then behind those, on that belt, that rubber belt that's moving toward the checkout person, are her, her purse, her computer, and she's in the process of taking her shoes off one by one. Get it? She's obviously someone who travels by air a great deal, and so as she's in this habit where there's this belt going by on her left-hand side, she first unloads her groceries and then begins doing something automatically that she's reminded that she might do. So she imagines, in fact, forgetting where she really is, she imagines she's also at the airport and starts taking off all of the things that need to go through that machine to be sure that it's safe. She's automatically acting in a way that is irrational. You know, in Christianity, we're invited to become more conscious than that. We're invited to let our faith inform our reality and our perspective. We are invited to something beyond our self-centered vanity or our hunger for acquisition. We're invited, in fact, to distinguish between our wants and our needs. You know, we quote in scriptures, we Christians, that saying, from everyone to whom much is given, much will be required. Actually, Gospel of Luke, the chapter that we read from and heard from today, just a little later in the chapter. In fact, that 12th chapter in the Gospel of Luke, it has a lot of parables and warnings to fools like us who have been given so much, and yet are lulled into believing that all others live just like us and have the same choices that we have. And it simply is not true. Most of the world lives on a few dollars a day. Or perhaps, I am wondering, are we hyped by the primal parts of our brains making us feel just as afraid of scarcity and fearful about our own needs not being met as if we were still hunters and gatherers searching daily for food when clearly we are not? And so today's lessons from Ecclesiastes and Luke awaken us to this wonderful theme that does comport with real life, warning us that storing up treasures in this life is simply an idle task. The lesson from Ecclesiastes says that it is all vanity. And in the parable in Luke, God says to the rich man who produced abundantly and set his sights on bigger and better barns where he could store more of the goods that he had produced, God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you." Today, as any day, it may be our last for any one of us. And that, my friends, is a good place to begin to set priorities and to make choices. On the front of our bulletin today, it says, you can look at it while I read it, "So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves but are not rich toward God." All is vanity and disappears in an instant. And all that time and that energy that we have spent accumulating more and more stuff, the wisdom of that gospel says it doesn't matter. You know, there was this very rich man who was just about to die, and he really wanted to take some of his wealth with him to heaven. So he started negotiations with God about the matter. And God, was not sure, as it had never been done before, and God did not want to set a precedent. But the man badgered and badgered and badgered him, and so finally, after long talks, God relented and agreed to let the rich man bring one suitcase into heaven. And so just a few days before the man died, the man went and converted all of his wealth into gold bullion, and then found a very sturdy suitcase, and he filled that suitcase with the gold bullion, and somehow, I guess with God's help, he arrived after death at the pearly gates in front of St. Peter. suitcase in hand. And Peter said, no, 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 no. Nobody brings anything else into heaven. You just have to be ready to come yourself. And the man replied, no, I've been negotiating with God. You need to call God. He'll tell you. This is legitimate. And so Peter called God and found out, in fact, that God had given this man permission to bring this suitcase in. And so Peter was wondering and curious, he said, so what exactly is in your suitcase that you want to bring it into heaven? So the man carefully opened the suitcase, and Peter spied the gold bullion. And he said, oh, I see, you've brought new pavement. The streets of heaven are paved in gold. So for most of us, whatever we would carry out of this world may not be so readily useful in heaven. But this is a joke, and we all know that we take nothing material with us when we leave this world. Some of you have heard this story before, but it bears repeating in this context. My oldest son, Christian, who is now 40, was in 7th grade. I was serving in a parish at the time, and so I was out of the house really early, by 6 a.m. on Sunday mornings, and so it was left to Christian and my kid's dad to get the kids ready and himself and to show up for 10 o'clock church. And so while 3 other people in the family were ready, standing in the front hall, Christian stood at the top of the stairs and with his hands on his hips said, I'm not going to church. And his father said, oh, yes, you are. And Christian said, I am not going to church. And his father said, oh, yes, you are. And his father said, and he said, it was a back and forth a lot where you are going, I am not going. And finally, Christian, exasperated, sputtered, well, why do I have to go to church anyway? To which his father replied, because you're going to be dead a long time. It's a funny way to say it, but if in fact we cannot take anything with us and we are going to live for a long time with God in eternity, doesn't it make sense to spend some time right here and now and to spend our resources, in fact, cultivating the one relationship that actually lasts? There's a story from the 4th century Desert Fathers. An old man said, if you have lost gold or silver, you can find something to replace what you lost. However, if you lose time, you cannot replace what you lost. So I know I'm preaching to the faithful. And if we say we value our faith, our relationship with God, the great gifts that God has bestowed on us, the great gift of God in Jesus Christ, the gift of his Son, are we not the wiser if we cultivate our faith and our relationship with God and with our faith community, with each other? Aren't we wiser if we spend our resources and our time on that project? It may be the one small way we can let our values inform our everyday, moment-by-moment decisions. It may not be easy, but it is wise to put our trust first and foremost in God. Eternity is a long time, and I believe that relationships of love last forever. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.